This is a 1740s Royal Artillery saber, England. It is a pattern-made hilt, forged blade. It's got some good nicks in the blade. It also, as we can see, has it is like a backsword style, so that's just this last about 8 inches are sharpened on this side. A little bit of an expansion towards the point of the sword to bring the balance a little bit more forward on the weapon. I think it also has a really nice handling. It really wants to move. I think it would probably cut pretty well. I won't cut with it, but
no, I won't
it would cut pretty well.
Yes. Oh yeah. Yeah, that is. You can immediately feel the strong distal taper. It is a substantial blade. It's quite broad, but it's perfectly nimble. There's definitely some quite obvious.
Yeah, and we see again, we were talking about that on the rapier. This one comes down to a much finer edge to cleave through something. A different set of priorities at work in the making of this weapon than with that rapier.
Yeah.
And we see that fuller also, of course, terminating here ahead of where they're planning for most of that cleaving to occur.
Yeah, it's really thin and broad at the end. So the good thing about that is you don't have to be as worried about keeping the apex of the edge as sharp, because just the geometry in and of itself will help a whole lot, just because there's so much less resistance. So bring it in here. There's some obvious nicks right there. Particularly also at the end here. Now that right there, I'm guessing maybe a parry rather than a cut, because that would be quite low on the blade for that. And yeah, speaking of which, we have a little bit here too. That was probably a parry as well. And just take a look at how thin it is. It really flattens out, and it keeps doing so. Like the very tip is wafer thin, which of course is also how you get a little bit extra damage potentially. But it's really to maximize the cutting ability. It very much does. I'm just looking at the point to try to guess if this is the original point or if it might have
if it's been taken
rounded
down at
off.
some point. It's very hard to know.
Yeah, it could have been original. It could have been, damaged or snapped off even and then rounded off. Who knows? The handle is quite comfortable. Generally, I'm personally not a big fan of metal handles, but this one here is perfectly good.
Yeah, it feels really nice in the hand.
It does. Pommel there. And it's also interesting that they bother to do this kind of detailing here, which I would think on a lot of reproductions that would probably be skipped. Like particularly when you have it in hand, you can't even see it. When you're wearing it though, then you can. So it makes sense for that to be there. There's quite a bit of little bit extra spice. That's often skipped just to make reproductions cheaper. Regardless of the fact that you wouldn't want to be hit with any blade.
Yeah.
This is definitely high up there. Being cut by the rapier just now would be far more survivable than this.
Yeah.
Even though, again, it's not a fun time, but this is definitely a powerful cutting sword.
And just showing the difference in priorities of the types of actions you're expecting to use one weapon for versus the other. Mm-hmm. This being more of a war and melee weapon, and the rapier being a more dueling-oriented weapon.
Yeah, this would not be particularly comfortable to carry around in everyday life. You want that guard, of course, to protect your hand, but that for civilian carry, even though civilians did carry rapiers, which are quite awkward to carry, so that's not always a deterrent in that regard. Like, you might carry it anyway, but very nice. Trying to imagine if someone were to make a reproduction of this in sort of like the mid-range budget to mid-range, it would be so much worse.
Yeah.
They would cut so many corners, the blade wouldn't be right, it would probably be quite tip heavy.
Yes.
It would be much thicker throughout, it wouldn't cut as well. It probably wouldn't feel as good either.
Yeah, it certainly is possible for us to reproduce these, but it's so interesting. I think you'd end up having to really custom make every part of it to do it. So that's what would put your price up.
Yeah, absolutely. Even just these grooves in the handle like this is the kind of stuff that they tend to often skip. Again, unless of course it's a higher end reproduction or it's a custom made replica.
Yeah.
Particularly of someone working with the original. And I think that's probably often the problem with a lot of reproductions on the market. They just didn't have the original in person. Like maybe they had like some measurements and pictures and everything, but it's just not the same as when you actually have it on hand, literally, and can...
Yeah, and continually be comparing them. Have your first prototype beside you and be able to pick them up and feel them, and then, okay, I'll do the next prototype, we'll do it a little bit differently. I think that's certainly... There are certainly some makers in Italy that I think get a little more time to handle originals, and I like the quality and feeling of the weapons that they make. And there's some North American makers that certainly can make custom weapons that are much closer to these in nature. But a lot of what we encounter for reproductions are they're trying to make some kind of more mass market reproduction, and so they then cut a lot of corners.
Most people won't notice because they haven't handled antique originals, so they may think, and that's where often the surprise comes from, because even when you hand someone a more accurate reproduction, suddenly they're like, oh, this is so much lighter than I thought, because you know, until then they've only handled the cheaper clunkers.
I wonder how much, you know, sometimes market perception has such a compulsion for a maker, because you might get something, maybe you make something that's accurately reproduced, but when you try to sell it to people, they say, oh, this is clearly not a good reproduction because it's so light. This is clearly a fake sword. And so there's thus an incentive for somebody making a reproduction to actually make it a little bit more beefy, a little bit more, so that people think it's more real. Like this thing where that sort of our myth of the sword, like the sounds of swords, you know, people are disappointed with how swords actually sound, what the clanging and shings and all that kind of thing sounds like. But if we used the real sounds in a movie, people would say, oh, this movie's so fake.
It has to be larger than life.
That's right, yeah. So that's interesting to think how that might impact what a reproduction house is making.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, at Kane's place, I handled an antique that he has, and my first impression was actually, this feels kind of like a toy because it was so light. Like even by the standards, like I know what a sword generally is supposed to feel like. Yeah. But that one was still extremely light. Awesome. Thanks for giving us a look at that. I like that one quite a bit.
I wish we could have all just antiques here.
Of course.
Maybe over time, we kind of gradually, I've been able to kind of start replacing some of our reproductions with antiques. And so it really has to be in kind of a price range that we can afford, but also to represent something that is connected to the martial art. Because it's not our museum here, our goal is to be a museum that's devoted to the martial art, not just the material culture of that art. Being able to pick up that, this is a real saber that's really saw some use. It has the properties that we would want of a real cutting weapon. This is a weapon that would get used. Those are like kind of the perfect things that I'm always keeping my eye out for.
Personally, I would not want to own one of those really elaborately decorated, gilded nobleman's swords that are just like, I mean, it is great to look at, but that's what museums are for. You can go to the museum and look at them and get a up close, you know, impression of the amazing craftsmanship, which is fantastic. But owning that is kind of not really a point, because then you would just, like you say, you would just lock it away and just occasionally look at it. It's more interesting to actually be able to handle it and do something. Yeah,
something experiential. Like I want to, you know, a lot of my interest in being involved in doing historical martial arts is I want to touch and connect with the experience of this. I want to pull that knowledge from the past forward, and one of the ways that I do that is by working with real tools. And also to be able to inform the reproductions that we work with, so that we're working with weapons that feel like the real thing, that act like the real thing and respond like the real thing, because that is a lot of what teaches us about the art and its practice.